this video, I'm going to show you guys how we shot this commercial in a narrative way and how we lit it to feel organic and seamless. So I'm going to show you guys exactly how we did it in this video. All right, so I want to start with this first scene where we open up in the hospital where the patient finds out that he has ALS. We wanted to set up the wide shot first because this helps establish what the blocking is going to be and what the global lighting setup and look is going to be for the entire scene. So we started with the wide shot on a 20mm f2.8, and we wanted this to feel a lot moodier, right? Because he's finding out some terrible, terrible news. So to achieve that, we knew we had to backlight the characters. So what I did was I just had a Godox 400 just off on the opposite side of the camera here. And we just had that backlighting our characters here and creating that contrast in our frame. And then we actually had our camera set up at 4,000 Kelvins, and this was to give that bluer, colder look that we were looking for. And then I set my key light, which was the backlight, at 6,500 Kelvins, and this was to create that bluer, colder look. And then over here, we added this tube light as a practical light, a highlight in the frame. And with that, we had that at 3,200 Kelvins, just a color contrast in the scene to create more contrast. And to talk more about the composition here, we actually shot into the corner of the room, and this created this illusion of depth and created these converging lines, which, you know, helps create a deeper image and make it feel less flat and helped us separate the characters away from the wall a little bit. Okay, so that takes us to the second scene where it's more of a memory of him with his family, and we wanted it to feel a little bit warmer, a little bit more wholesome. And so we set up our frame here. We set up pretty low so that we could, you know, compose, you know, foreground, midground, and background, creating layers. Again, with cinematography, you're creating layers. That's what makes an image look cinematic, is creating layers. We're using, you know, our foreground here. We're using midground, and then we're using background. So I set up my frame so that shooting into the corner of the room again to create that illusion of depth. I set my camera up at 4,000 Kelvins again. And why I did that was because I wanted to create this color separation between the daylight that was coming outside and the warmth of the candles inside. So by setting my camera at 4,000 Kelvins, it allowed the daylight, which is 5,600 Kelvins, to be balanced into this colder, bluer look. And so that was my base. I set that first. And then with that, I knew the candles would be the motivation of the key light on our characters here. And so I just had a 1x1 panel just off to the side of the camera on the opposite side. So I'm still lighting, you know, far side key. And that's actually lighting these characters here at 2,800 Kelvins. And that gives that warmth and stuff. And we created this, this fire effect in the light. And so that we would get that flickering effect like the candles would be on their face. So it would be motivated. We were able to basically create this beautiful contrast on her face there, instead of like bringing it right beside or right in front of the camera and front lighting everything, or bringing it off to this side and it would have just like been totally front lit and flat. But we still wanted contrast. We still wanted to shape that. So by having that light nice and low beside the camera on the opposite side gave us the shadow on our characters. And you see this beautiful color contrast between the daylight and the tungsten. And then here we're creating the layers, right? We have the foreground of the cup here, and all the highlights of the candle is hitting that cup and creating that reflectiveness. And I put that cup there intentionally to create this foreground and all these lines leading to the girl. Again, right? Like with all our frames, we're creating this focal point. We're taking the viewer's eyes into the middle of the frame, which is the story, which is the character, the subject of what we want them to focus on. And so we have this, right? And then we have the camera nice and low. So you're feeling the tabletop here, you're feeling the cake here, and you're just having these beautiful foreground things to create that illusion of depth. So we make it less flat. One last thing is the window is backlighting her here, creating this blue separation between the tungsten on her face and the blue in the background. So it's creating this beautiful depth. And we're also using color contrast with the set decoration and the clothing. We have this red juice here. We have red balloons that contrast the blue windows and the blue balloons. And that helps create this unified image with colors. I actually go into this shot here, which is one of my favorite shots of the entire thing. And we have this wide frame here. And we're finding layers again, right? We're shooting through this doorway here. And I'm always, you notice there's a theme here. When I'm approaching a scene, I'm always finding the composition first before thinking about lighting. So I find with my phone where I'm going to frame up our composition. And so I tried out a couple different lenses on my phone. I felt like the 20mm was the best. And I set it up here just because I felt like the compression of like a 35mm would make it too flat. So I kept it on a 20mm. And so that created this beautiful kind of distance between our character and our camera. And then I knew that I was going to backlight him with the window because I wanted to create these layers. I wanted to have this foreground of darkness. I wanted to have this midground of kind of like the skin tone litness. And then I wanted to use this background, this depth from the background as the backlight, the window that's motivating the backlight. So I started with the backlight first because I think that helps me, you know, create a far side key, helps me kind of create a more moody image. And I like to start with the backlight. It's just the system I kind of use is starting with the backlight. So I used a 1K, the Godox 1K, and I have that at 3200 Kelvins and my camera at 5600 Kelvins just to create this warmer kind of daylight look in there. You can see on the floor here, you can see on the table, you can see all over. It's just really warm, it's rich. The colors are feeling like morning sun, right? And so that's what this 3200 Kelvins does when you put your lights outside. It creates this beautiful warmth to it. I worked with this one cinematographer on Superman and Lois, and he would use, in all his day scenes, he would use tungsten lights, 3200 Kelvin lights. And this would create this beautiful, just like this beautiful morning ray in all the day scenes and gave this life to it. And it was just so beautiful, gave this beautiful richness to the scene. And so I took that and wanted to use that in my thing. So that's what I did. I used 3200 Kelvins here. And then this backlight was still too contrasty because there was no other light in the scene. Everything else was falling off into darkness. So I was like, okay, I want to edge the character here. I want to have a key light. So what I did, I had a far side key just through this door, it was like 400 with a silk, just kind of blasting through that door and just kind of edging him here and creating this beautiful defined contrast on his face. You know, we have the shadow side and then we have the lit side. And so that created that beautiful contrast in our frame. We had those two lights kind of set up and I was like, I want to add something else. So what I did, I actually had a 600X, which was shooting through a window behind our camera. Our camera is facing this way and was shooting through that. And what that was doing was creating this beautiful, hard tungsten light. And it was just front lighting that. And I thought it was like so organic. It felt like the backlight of the sun that was coming through the window was hitting another building on the other side of the house that we're at and shooting through the windows. And it felt like a reflection. And I thought it was so cool. And I actually had that 600X super low shooting up through the window from the first floor to the second floor. And what that did, it created these beautiful shadows. And then I just had, you know, just a little flag as a topper just to cut some of the light at the top here. You can see that's just kind of fading off that light and creating this beautiful kind of like soft gradient so that not everything's lit and we have these different lighting values, right? We're creating layers again. And then we kind of come to our final frame here of what I wanted to show you guys. And again, like I'm looking for my frame first. I'm trying to find what makes the frame interesting. I'm trying to find the composition first, and then I figure out how I'm gonna light that. Look for a frame, and I found, you know, the foreground of these walls here, and shooting frame within a frame again, creating that layers and that separation. And I had my camera here on a 20mm f2.8. And so I had these two windows here, right? Behind our character, and the character had to walk through the door and he lands here on this spot. And so I was like, okay, how do I light this? Well, first I got to expose for the outside because he opens that door and I don't want that outside to be super blown out. Sure, the window looks really blown out right now, but that's because my camera's super low and it's looking into the sky. So there's not much information in the sky. It was an overcast day. And so but when you open the door, there's houses and there's trees and there's things out there. So we want to be able to expose that and make it feel like it's the same exposure from outside to inside, just so it doesn't feel like there's these dramatic exposure differences. And so what I did to expose that was I set my camera with an ND 1.2. So that's 4 stops. I had to take down 4 stops inside my camera to expose the outside. Okay, so what happens when I do that? Well, the inside is completely dark. It's completely black because there's barely any ambient light versus what's happening outside. So what I did was, again, I start with my backlight first. So I put my backlight over here through this window, and that was beautifully edging our character. It was edging these coats here and edging this door, and the Canon FDs are, you know, creating that beautiful halation, and it's creating this beautiful ambient inside this room. But it's still too silhouette-y. It doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel organic. And again, on this project, we wanted to take a back seat with the cinematography. We wanted it to feel organic. We wanted it to feel like a narrative piece, almost like a short film. And so I was like, okay, well, I got to add a key light in here so that we see his face a little bit better. So what I did is I put a sidey kind of key light, something far side, so that we're still holding this contrast here, right? And so that was just the 400 through a silk, kind of pushing through that door frame. And maybe I could have added a little cider just to kill, you know, that door frame, but to me, it was totally fine. A lot of the light was actually bouncing and hitting the wall and returning back to his face and making it really flat. So what I did was I added that black duvetine just off to the side of the camera just to suppress and control that light that was bouncing off that wall and making sure there was no return. And when I had these two lights going, I was like looking at the image and I was like, oh, it looks good. It looks fine. But it still felt a little too contrasty. It wasn't organic. It was a little too stylized. It felt a little lit. It felt like the key light was very lit. And I really don't like to add a bounce for the fill side. I just feel like it doesn't feel natural. It feels synthetic. It feels like there's something there. So what I did instead was I had a 600X just behind this wall here, and I had it on a spotlight attachment. And when you have these spotlight attachments, they're fantastic because they really control the beam of light so that it doesn't spill everywhere, and that hard light that's coming from that light isn't filling in the face or creating weird shadows and things. So we had that spotlight shooting right up into this corner, right into here. And what that did was it gave a global ambient lift. And that was probably, I'd probably say that was like 2 stops under our key light, 2 to 3 stops less, 2 stops less than our key. And that was just to kind of like not lift it too much so that we're still holding, you know, contrast here. We're still holding contrast on this side of the face, but it doesn't feel like super crunchy, and it feels kind of organic and natural. And so this is kind of how I lit this. And going into kind of color temperatures, since the outside was very overcast and very blue outside, I set my camera at 6,000 Kelvins just to warm up that color temperature from outside. Since we were opening that door and the outside was part of the scene, we had to build from there first and then work our way inside. So I set my camera to 6,000 Kelvins. So my lights feel very warm and tungsten-y, right? But I set them at 4,000 Kelvins, the lights outside, because 3,200 would be too warm, too orangey. It'd feel like 2,800 Kelvins since I'm cranking my Kelvins inside my camera. And then my key light was 5,000 Kelvins to keep a warmer look, but not too warm so it doesn't feel tungsten-y, but it feels, you know, daylighty, a warm daylight. Here, which was the spotlight, we had that at 6,000 Kelvins just to kind of, you know, balance out the tones that were going on. We didn't want all this warmth in there. We still wanted to keep, you know, some neutral or colder tones in the shadows, and just to create that color contrast again within our frame. And so that's kind of how we kind of lit this and how we played with color temperature within these scenes to kind of create contrast, but also to just like create separation and make it feel like there's so many different layers happening in our frame. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate it. There is a link down below. I am picking 3 lucky subscribers to hop onto a free month-long one-on-one coaching with me where I can help you guys with your careers in cinematography and however you want to elevate to the next level. So yes, fill out that application form down below. That'd be super awesome to get you guys on board. And I'll be announcing those 3 subscribers very soon. But until then, guys, I'll see you guys in the next video. Adios.